Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Cermak. I'm a coastal outreach specialist with Pennsylvania Sea Grant, and I will be both moderating and presenting in today's webinar. I would like to start off by thanking everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this event, and I'm truly looking forward to the content that will be shared. While I discuss a few of the webinar logistics, I encourage you to enter your name and the organization that you are representing in the chat box. If you have any questions regarding the content that will be covered in today's presentations, please enter those questions into the chat and we will answer them as time allows. If we are unable to answer your questions today, we will pass them on to the appropriate presenter and share those responses as soon as possible. For those that are unable to attend or would like to review the content at a later time, this webinar will be recorded and be available on the Pennsylvania Sea Grant website in the next few weeks. Today's webinar will include Get to Know Green Infrastructure by myself, Tom Cermak, a coastal outreach specialist at Pennsylvania Sea Grant, Tackling Barriers to Green Infrastructure one code at a time by Julia Nordek, Water Quality and Coastal Community Specialist at Wisconsin Sea Grant, and Incremental Change Towards Greener Infrastructure by Matthew Waldinger, Director of Planning and Development at Mill Creek Township. Without further ado, let's begin this green stormwater infrastructure discussion. I will begin today with Get to Know Green Infrastructure and try to provide the background information that will lead into the next presentations. First, I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce myself. As I stated, my name is Tom Cermak. I've been a member of the Penn State University Pennsylvania Sea Grant program since 2012, and I'm located in our Erie, PA office. The focus areas in which I address under the scope of my position include water quality and quantity improvement, public access improvement and land conservation, invasive species management, land use planning, and outreach. Some of you may be wondering, who is Pennsylvania Sea Grant? Pennsylvania Sea Grant is one of 34 university-based programs around the United States. Pennsylvania Sea Grant is a collaboration between NOAA, Penn State University, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Our national Sea Grant focus areas include healthy coastal ecosystems, resilient coastal communities and economies, environmental literacy and workforce development, and sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. For over the last 20 years, our program has been promoting the ecological and economic sustainability of Pennsylvania's coastal resources through science-based research, education, and extension. What is stormwater? Stormwater runoff is the result of precipitation events such as rain or snowmelt that flows over land or impervious surfaces such as paved streets, parking lots, and building rooftops. Impervious surfaces act as a barrier for infiltration and promote the off-site flow of stormwater. As stormwater flows across the impervious surfaces, it often collects trash, bacteria, heavy metals, and other pollutants before entering storm sewers being discharged to local waterways. Historically, communities have utilized a system of gutters, pipes, tunnels, and basins to collect and transport stormwater. Also referred to as gray infrastructure, these systems focus on the transportation of stormwater flows away from the built environment and to local receiving waters. In many locations throughout the country, the gray infrastructure network is aging, and the capacity to successfully manage stormwater flows is decreasing. In addition to aging infrastructure, the frequency and severity of weather events is surging, resulting in greater flows and increasing the strain on stormwater systems. To address these concerns, communities are utilizing various forms of green infrastructure techniques to increase system capacity. While the primary focus of gray infrastructure is to manage stormwater volume, green infrastructure protects, restores, or mimics the natural water cycle. Green infrastructure captures and filters stormwater where it falls through the utilization of plant or soil systems, permeable surfaces, and stormwater capture, promoting infiltration and evapotranspiration. Green infrastructure provides a method to address both stormwater quantity and quality. Some of the benefits of green infrastructure include improved water quality through infiltration and reduced stormwater discharges, reduced flooding, improved air quality through the installation of new plant material, increased wildlife habitat, the reduction of urban heat island effect, new employment opportunities, increased property values, and new opportunities for passive nature-based recreation. The types of green infrastructure that we will be covering in this session include rain gardens, planter boxes, bioswales, downspout disconnection, permeable pavement, green streets and alleys, green parking, green roofs, urban tree canopy, riparian buffers, rainwater harvesting, and land conservation. Rain gardens. Rain gardens are shallow depressions that contain native plantings to collect stormwater runoff from small impervious areas such as sidewalks, streets, roofs, and parking lots. Generally constructed in low-lying areas and designed to capture and filter stormwater volume from one storm event. During construction, 6 to 12 inches of the soil is removed and replaced with tillage, compost, or sand to increase infiltration. Planter boxes. Planter boxes are very similar to rain gardens, and they are constructed with vertical walls and are best utilized in urban locations where space is limited. They promote the capture and temporary ponding of stormwater within the planter, allowing slow infiltration. During large precipitation events, excess capture is designed to flow through the planter into a location where it can infiltrate soils or enter the storm sewer system. These can be a valuable tool for beautification in urbanized areas. Bioswales. Bioswales are long, shallow depressions that capture stormwater runoff and are often located along roadways, curbs, and parking lots. Vegetation and natural materials within the bioswale slow stormwater flows, promote infiltration, uptake, and filter runoff. Different than a ditch or a swale, bioswales incorporate and promote bioretention, the process in which contaminants and sedimentation are removed from the stormwater. Downspout disconnection and rainwater harvesting. This process uses the rerouting of downspout flows into rain barrels or cisterns, where it can be reserved for later use or directed to permeable areas on site where it can infiltrate soils. If striving to promote infiltration, it is important to ensure that the designated location can handle these flows, and the redirection of these waters will not negatively impact adjacent homes or infrastructure. This provides a cost-effective alternative for individuals seeking to address stormwater in a specific location, such as a private residence. Permeable pavement. Permeable pavements can be utilized as an alternative in locations where impervious surfaces have or are planned to be installed. These permeable surfaces promote infiltration, treatment, and storage of rainwater where it falls. These materials can include pervious concrete, porous asphalt, or permeable interlocking pavers. Green streets and alleys. Streets and alleys represent a significant percentage of impervious cover in developed localities. Green streets and alleys are designed and developed by the integration of 2 or more green features. In addition to stormwater management benefits, this technique can be utilized to effectively address urban revitalization, beautification, and pedestrian travel. Green parking. Generally consisting of large quantities of impervious surfaces, green infrastructure elements can be easily integrated into parking lot design and construction. Green parking lots may include features such as permeable parking surfaces, planted islands, improved tree canopy, and bioswales. In addition to addressing water quality and quantity concerns, larger vegetation will provide shade and drastically reduce surface temperatures within the parking area. Green roofs. Green roofs are designed to be covered with a growing media, whether that be planting trays or soil-covered membrane, and plant material. Once vegetation is established, soil and plant material absorbs and filters precipitation, reducing downspout and storm sewer flows. Green roofs are a particularly cost-effective tool in dense urban environments where available ground space for other forms of green infrastructure may be limited. This method can also provide increased structure efficiency through the reduction of heating and cooling costs. These roofs must be designed to withstand not only the weight of plants and the saturated planting materials, but also snow and ice load. Urban tree canopy. Trees absorb and filter stormwater while improving air quality and reducing surface temperatures. Many communities have target numbers for tree canopy cover and strategically work to plant new trees in locations where they have been removed or the density is insufficient. Urban tree canopy improvements provide a great opportunity for community engagement and participation. Riparian buffers. Riparian buffers are strips of vegetation that are established adjacent to streams or other water bodies. Quality buffers include grasses, perennials, shrubs, and trees. The benefits of riparian buffers include the filtering of nutrients, pesticides, and waste from agricultural and urban runoff, vegetative root structure that holds soil, preventing erosion and stabilizing eroding banks, and improve the quality of aquatic and terrestrial habitats. Riparian buffers can be utilized as a tool in landscape scale green infrastructure planning, serving a variety of functions and creating a seamless interface among rural, suburban, and urban communities. Rainwater harvesting. Rainwater harvesting systems reduce stormwater volume by capturing runoff and reserving it for later use or release. These systems can be implemented at various scales, from a rain barrel to private residence, to a commercial cistern and aquifer. Land conservation. Water quality and flooding risk can be addressed through the protection of open space and sensitive natural areas. Target conservation locations to address stormwater concerns include riparian corridors and floodplains adjacent to streams, wetlands, and steep slopes. Land conservation efforts may also provide increased recreational opportunities for residents and visitors to your community. Conservation design. Conservation design is development planning that considers the natural landscape and the ecology of the site, facilitating development while preserving the natural features that provide the greatest value and functionality. Conservation design principles include flexibility of lot size and building footprint, thoughtful protection and management of key natural areas, reduction in impervious surfaces, and the incorporation of various green infrastructure features. In summary, green infrastructure provides a host of naturalized alternatives to address stormwater quality and quantity concerns. It can be utilized to increase a community's stormwater management capacity by supplementing the gray infrastructure network. It can be incorporated at various scales and locations, addressing the emerging needs of a particular site or the community as a whole. And installation and maintenance of green infrastructure may increase opportunities for community engagement and participation. As I conclude the first session of this webinar, I would like to inform everyone of an opportunity that's coming up. It's the Pennsylvania Lake Erie Environmental Forum. This will be held on May 16th. The topic is the future of stormwater, and the registration link will be available in the chat window as well. Please find my contact information on the current slide, and at this time, I will be happy to answer any questions before we move on to our next presentation. Up next, we have Julia Nordak with Wisconsin Sea Grant. Good afternoon, Julia.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much. I did a lot of buttons to get pushed here and get myself unmuted too. All right, thanks Tom for the introduction. Nice to have all of you. Thanks for inviting me to this. I'm going to talk a little bit about a tool that I created with a lot of great partners at Wisconsin Sea Grant. So like Tom, I'm an outreach specialist for Wisconsin Sea Grant. I'm based in Green Bay, and I work with communities along the Great Lakes for water quality and coastal resilience. And green infrastructure really kind of is overarching to both of those themes. So I'd like to give credit to two of the main partners who helped create the guide, Julie Beth Hines, the planning consultant, who's really valuable with the actual code audit methodology, and then Kate Morgan, who works at the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District community outreach. So, all right, well, let's get started and talk about green infrastructure and codes and ordinances. So why are codes and ordinances so important in general? Well, codes and ordinances govern many aspects of the community life, including roads, sidewalks, land use, development, maintenance of public and private property, as well as they also set forth kind of the structure and the process and procedures for governance in a community. So many codes and ordinances were written before we understood the effects of land use and development on stormwater runoff. And so across the country, there's a lot of communities with a lot of outdated regulations, and they can have a really big impact for green infrastructure. And oftentimes they'll discourage or indirectly or just completely prohibit the use of green infrastructure. Some examples of codes or ordinances are, that they found are like places in the code where it directs people how to tie up their horse properly downtown, or different parking space regulations for men's and women's department stores. So these are the kind of things that the code audit is looking to address. There's also a lot of other emerging there's also a lot of emerging and other needs that ultimately involve local codes and ordinances. So many communities have to update their stormwater permits. We're dealing with more intense rain events and other hazards. And we have a lot of communities in the US, especially for Wisconsin, and are dealing with impaired waterways and developing TMDLs, total maximum daily loads. We also have changing technical standards. So this is an example of a failed bioretention system. And so when things fail in a community, especially green infrastructure, it kind of has long-lasting impacts. So we don't want those things to change. So getting those technical standards correct. Green infrastructure, many of them are in general newer technologies, and they're evolving constantly. So really not having such a restrictive code, but thinking more about how we can evolve with the technology and get it right. So again, we're not having failed projects. There's also a lot of things at the community level, and from what I've gathered with the audience, I'm talking to our many municipal staff and organizations that maybe work with communities on Lake Erie, that maybe when the codes and things are ambiguous, or they're conflicting, or they're just completely outdated, you're really leaving it up to the culture, the experience, or the preferences of who's making those decisions at the community level when they're going out for permitting. To approve a permit or not, or the stormwater plan. So really, there's some really big factors that have to do with the culture and how things are decided in a community. So one of them is, I'm sure we've all had the experience, maybe there's someone in the community who's ready to go. Let's make this city green and put in all this green infrastructure. So a lot of times, a lot of the people I've seen, a lot of mayors are really excited about doing green infrastructure. But what happens, when maybe the election doesn't turn out the way, or they decide to, run off to Mexico and retire from their position, and there's turnover in a lot of these elected positions, or even in staff. And so one of the things that we really want to think about is how are green infrastructure changes in these processes codified moving forward? How do we create that legacy? Another big barrier in general is, those failed projects, and the applicant shall incorporate the comments of the village engineer, the fire chief, the public works director, and fear being the person on the other end of that failed project trying to answer questions. Maybe because the information is not up to date, or the code's not really up to date to address the legitimacy of those projects. There's a lot of communities that have aesthetic habits because we've always done it that way. So the kiss of death to new approaches like green infrastructure is when we've always done it that way becomes backed up in the code and it's codified. Thinking about landscaping should be kept in the general appearance of neighboring developments, but who decides that? Preferences for ponds and mowed grass along the right of way, and avoiding just complaints in general. And then there's situations when no one's deciding. Communities sometimes, we let the applicant decide what to do. Really, what is missing here in this picture? And on the webinar, it's harder because I can't see anybody or know what's going on. So you can throw it in the chat. But really, what is missing in this picture? We have, you have a beautiful bioretention that you've just built, but nobody checked to see if the developer was going to put in, curbs, so people could just drive into them. And then again, more failed practices. So when there's a lack of standards, a lack of oversight, or prescriptive language, it promotes really bad design practices. And so again, leading to those failed experiences. So we want to help, in the codes and ordinances, get credible information that helps really make our projects successful. And then also one of probably the biggest barrier is this culture of resistance, or I heard it failed somewhere else. We have clay soils, we have freeze thaw cycles. I failed in Wauwatosa. These are really big things that communities really need to overcome, but that codes and ordinances can help with. So why are codes and ordinances important? Really what it comes down to is if the code language is not clear that green infrastructure is an acceptable or preferred approach to managing stormwater, it will not likely be considered in development projects, capital projects, in site design planning. So it's really, something that needs to be thought about right at the front if a community wants to do green infrastructure. And one of the things that we talk a lot about with communities is that it's really not about more cost or regulation. It's really thinking a little bit smarter. So the picture on the left there, many communities require screening in the parking lots or so forth like that. But we know that water doesn't run uphill. And the same in both of these situations, parking lot landscaping was required, but they have very different results for the receiving raindrop in that, where the rain's going to go from that site. So thinking smarter about what we're able to put into the ground. And so also thinking, okay, well, you might be sitting there going, so what? Well, our community complies with our state stormwater standards or our MS4 permit. Well, this stick in the mud here, this tree, the sad dead tree was, fully approved and built in full compliance with local regulations and the stormwater permit for this site. And so, this is ultimately just money down the drain in general for these communities. And no one wants to see that. So when we know that working with codes and ordinances, they can be pretty ambiguous and kind of hard to understand when we're talking to folks. And it's not really clear, like, do they actually matter? Are they going to actually make an impact on water quality here locally? And so as part of this project, it was really important to demonstrate the impacts of code changes on the landscape. And so we modeled using the modeling called WinSlam, which is used for the statewide stormwater permitting in Wisconsin, to look at whether, so we take a code revision. And so unless you're a planner on this, maybe you're really excited to read this, but most of us, it's going over our heads and it's like blah, blah, blah. So we took that code and basically, if we redevelop this site under the new code, what would the impact to water quality and water quantity be? So for example, that was about new standards for parking lot landscaping and including bioretention. So this parking lot, almost a half acre, and an addition of redeveloped with an additional 2,300 square feet of bioretention is going to reduce stormwater volume by 46% and our TSS by 59%, our total suspended solids. So some pretty big impacts. Another example, a really good one is in the code audit, we deal with impervious surfaces and parking a lot too. And where can you reduce impervious surfaces? So this, again, kind of boring, not really sure anyone, well, unless you're a planner, I know there's some people out there who really love code language. But thinking about this site, so if we did thinking about how to reduce impervious surfaces and just parking. So this is a small commercial bank site. They have 6 drive-through lanes. So thinking about, and then how you can maybe take out 2 of those drive-through lanes, put in bioretention and just reduce the parking space, just reducing the amount of parking spaces to up-to-date standards throughout the US. 44 spaces instead of 64 will reduce 21% of impervious cover reduction at this site, and then have a pretty big impact just alone without bioretention, just reducing impervious surfaces. So almost 20% runoff volume and 23% TSS reductions. And then the last one, there's more in the workbook. Oh, and I was going to put our link to the workbook in there, but I forgot to do that. So maybe Tom can do that if he has it on hand. But we have also, one of the other things, there are several examples in there. The last example today is just replacing turf grass with native vegetation, those deep-rooted plants that soak up and infiltrate into the ground. So this is a commercial development site. It's 1.74 acres. And without doing any other best management practices, stormwater best management practices, but just replacing the turf grass on this property with native vegetation would reduce runoff with almost 3/4 of the volume runoff and 64% of our total suspended solids. If you add bioretention in this, the modeling, it just says all runoff, 100% runoff is complete. So just replacing turf grass with native vegetation can really make a huge difference. So yes, absolutely. So simple, yes, codes do matter, and we can definitely do better. Implementing simple code changes can make a really big difference in volume and pollution loading if sites are tweaked. So many little things can improve water quality outcomes throughout a community. So we developed this workbook. It's written for use by county and municipal staff with particular roles in zoning and land use and stormwater. I think a lot of the people that tend to use it are nonprofits working with communities, or extension people like myself working with communities, and then who want to do a code audit process. But this is really kind of, to help actually identify barriers in your codes and ordinances, and then help prioritize where those code amendments could be made. So what makes this audit unique? Okay, well, we really understand that all communities they all are very unique. Codes and ordinances vary widely in general across communities, and all the communities have different goals and objectives, so no one code is going to help reduce the barriers to green infrastructure. When we look at this, there's not really one. You have to look at the wider picture, and you have to understand how green infrastructure fits within the context of the community. Communities are unique. They have different culture and goals needs. So one of the first steps in the guidebook is really thinking about that, like where does green infrastructure fit into my community, and thinking about it. So we have a community scoping exercise worksheet that municipal staff would do together, or they and across departments. So we're asking things about the community, what makes them unique, stuff like, do you have natural assets that you want to protect, that the community really rallies around, that really want people celebrate in general? Do you have coastal or do you have hazards and things like that? So do you have flooding issues happening in your community? How might green infrastructure address that? What are you already dealing with? What's your general community identity and character? Are you a bird city, or do you have a master gardener club? Some of these things already are part of, there's a lot of advocates out there already working in your communities for greening and doing restoration work. How can we leverage those relationships to build support for green infrastructure? What has your past been with green infrastructure in your community? Have you used it before? How was it successful? Well, what were the problems? Who, if it failed, why, and who was involved, and things like that. Just really understanding that context is really important for moving forward. And then also community acceptance in general, like what kind of neighborhoods do you have? A community that's, kind of open to maybe integrating some of these new practices in their neighborhoods, or maybe you have communities and neighborhoods that have more uniform looks, where some practices might not be accepted as much as others. And so really thinking what at the community level makes you unique, and what would work and what might not work in your community. So what also makes this audit unique is it's really down in the weeds. So it's a pretty involved process. And it also has nuanced ranking. So oftentimes we'll ask a question about a code or ordinance, and it could be yes or no, but there's a wide range of other possibilities it could be. So for example, so you have the, green, this practice permeable pavement, for example, completely allowed in the community or not. But sometimes they're in conflict with each other, or maybe the code doesn't even mention this type of practice. And so even when the code is silent on green infrastructure practices, it can be a barrier because no one's going to think about it or want to design something like that. So this is just an example of like doing code for permeable materials. Those columns 1 through 9 are different communities. And so there's a list of questions related to permeable materials. And then you have that nuanced response. So you can see community 7, pretty much you can go and install permeable sidewalks and pavers and things like that. But in community 5, for example, you really have some pretty serious barriers to not being able to do that. One other thing that makes this audit really unique is that it really helps to start breaking down silos. When you're working on the code audit, green infrastructure spans engineering and planning, and all those people kind of have to be at the table to talk about these issues. And so you really get the conversation started between all the different departments, including parks and code enforcement and things like that. So that's another thing. There's 15 different code topics ranging from stormwater management, zoning's a really important one, public works standards, parking, that permeable materials we already talked about, and landscaping. So many different areas of the code to touch on. Some of the key strategies, so there's kind of 4 main strategies when looking at codes and ordinances to help green infrastructure that can improve water quality and reduce impervious surface. So one of them is reducing impervious surfaces and maximizing vegetated landscape. So again, we have a not very happy tree here, but we want something like this. I think Tom had some great pictures of parking lots with green islands also. And where does everyone want to park when they go to a parking lot? So really thinking about how we can revegetate our impervious areas. Another one is looking at codes and ordinances that have to do with disconnection of I haven't said this in a while, disconnection of the effective impervious surface. So areas where stormwater is literally through a pipe, or maybe in this scenario, is going straight into the waterway itself, and thinking about, well, how can we actually have a buffer between that untreated stormwater and our local waterway? Another key strategy is just restoring the natural function of soils and vegetation and the landscape over time. So this was, a lot of runoff coming from a major highway next to a beach that was closed for many years because of pollution. And you can see the trash, and it's not really doing much. And the bacteria loads, is all very leading to a very not used beach. And then they put in a rain garden and did more infiltration. So really thinking about those hydrologic processes that infiltrate and remove those pollution before it goes to the lake. Another key strategy is controlling pollution from yucky things. So this dumpster was responsible itself for bacteria to a local waterway and a beach closing just downstream. It took them a long time to figure it out, but when we have not well managed sites like this, you have the birds doing their thing, and you have animals getting in there, and then them, contaminators. Other places might be like this that go under special considerations, is like doggy daycares, or places where you get your oil changed. Places where you don't want the direct stormwater runoff coming off from these sites going directly down the storm drain. And then one of the most important strategies too is clarifying the intent and purpose of your codes to encourage the use of green infrastructure. So think about your comprehensive plans, your purpose statements and zoning districts, stormwater management plans. Like, how can we explicitly say in the codes that when a developer comes to our community, they know we are serious about water quality and using green infrastructure. So these things are really important on the upfront end, and they also really help to codify it in the long term. Again, when staff or elected officials change over, the work can continue in this area. So what we did was we took like that color-coded version of the answers And we turned it into a kind of a grading piece for the workbooks. We couldn't hand out, colored pencils with every workbook. So we did an A through F system. And then again, this is just the nuanced code ranking. And this is Julie Beth Hines, who's the consultant whose methodology this is. And so for one, I just pulled out one example, like related to the landscaping code, in the parking lots and things like that. So is the use, and the audit question would be in the workbook, is the use of deep-rooted or native plants encouraged in the landscaping standards? We kind of describe what type of barrier, where you might find it in your codes and ordinances, any tips related to that, and then the community or the consultant gives itself a grade based on the answer to that. The online workbook, and at the end of the physical copy, has like a report card too. So anything that you answer in the workbook along the way will get automatically collected into so all the questions related to like architectural design standards, do they allow for stormwater control measures along the facade? These kind of things get collated at the end automatically and kind of grouped together. So a community can really start seeing where in their code they're having specific issues, but then also like prioritize wise what might be easy way reference of what they should focus on. So ultimately, the report card will help the team identify areas that are critical to where barriers exist. Those codes are identified, and they're a logical starting point for communities, but likely there's probably a lot of changes. So where do communities go from there, and how do they actually figure out what to prioritize for amendments? Well, again, you're gonna, bring this puppy back. You're gonna, the scoping information that you gathered at the beginning, will really help you inform a developing approach that fits your community. So like what maybe permeable materials are really desired, or a certain practice doesn't work as well than the other. This in turn can inform like any public outreach and so forth like that. So it's really where you want to reference what makes your community unique and where green infrastructure fits. How does green infrastructure meet your goals, really? Do you want more green space, or do you have that waterfront that you really want to focus in corridors on, or something like that? Really thinking about what the community, how green infrastructure fits into the context of your community. Thinking about current and future redevelopment in general. So development pressures really can help determine which amendments to prioritize. So is your community built out completely? If so, you might want to think about shared parking, permit for permeable materials, green roofs, planter boxes, things that can go on the facades in general. But maybe your community has large parcels that are available for development. Well, in that case, then you're going to think about like subdivision codes and minimizing road widths and sidewalk widths, and even small changes about like the driveway aprons and so forth like that. Cul-de-sac width, radii, things like that. So, and parking lot landscaping. Maybe you don't have any near-term or development or redevelopment happening, then you might want to think about what's going on in your community and focus in on retrofitting and things like this. So this was a Montessori school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And before, this is now like a large urban ecology rain garden. That's a place-based learning opportunity for this school. But before, it was just a giant asphalt playground. And now they've really turned it into a major asset for the school, and it captures all of their stormwater and sends it off clean to the local waterway. So thinking about that. Once you have kind of the code amendments and your priorities, and you have language to amend, hopefully all that work of, working with the different elected officials and municipal staff, then the amendments have to go to City Hall or your town board. And that's, always kind of a wild card. So, but hopefully if you brought everyone along for the ride and your code amendments that you've selected are really in support of your community goals in general. I've seen some good code changes happen, or code amendments come out of those kind of processes. So that's kind of where the code audit ends there. And then I was just going to add a few lessons learned that I've learned over the last few years. I've been we came out with this in 2017, and I've been working with communities since then on this. One of the things I really want people to understand is that this work is fundable. There's a lot of, like, you have a coastal management program in Pennsylvania, that we have foundations who are really interested in policy work. And so we have found they're also, the code audits themselves aren't that expensive to do. And so I really think we've been very successful in finding funding to get this going. It also has been kind of amazing to watch, but this has been more than just a code audit. It's really been helped do two things. I talked a little bit about breaking down those silos, but one of them, that is probably one of the most valuable things. This code audit it's not just like an assessment, but it gets the conversation in your community started among those different departments and elected officials. So it's just a great starting place to have that conversation and bring people together across the municipality to talk about green infrastructure. I personally think that also, this is more directed, lessons learned is it is just a tool. It's not, something direct like you should follow to the T. Tools are to help you, achieve something or do something specific, and you got to kind of use it to the way that fits your community in general or your process. We've seen a lot of ways that people have done the code audit, and even adapting it for like Florida, for example. So this was, designed in the Great Lakes, but Florida is kind of trying to figure out how they can adapt this kind of stuff to us. And then patience, it does take, we're all dealing with policy. And so the audit itself doesn't take very long, probably like 6 months, but it's that, it's all the work after about getting your elected officials and the decision makers and the staff to review the potential code amendment changes and getting everybody on board, and then passed through your local government. So there's a lot to go on, but it does, so it takes a while, but I've definitely seen a lot of successes along the way. And that's about it for me. I'm happy. Oh, I'll try to put I don't know. Oh, great. Thanks, Tom, for putting that in that. So the link to the guidebook is in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions. And if your community is kind of interested in this, I'm happy to talk further at a different date or just have a phone call about how I've seen it done, or any questions you have for moving this forward in your communities. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Julia. That was wonderful. Not seeing any questions in the chat at this time. If you think of questions at a later time, please feel free to enter them or send them directly to Julia or myself, and I'll be happy to forward them along. Up next, we have Matthew Waldinger with Mill Creek Township.
All right, thanks, Tom. Let me get my presentation here. Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. As Tom mentioned, I'm Matt Waldinger. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for Mill Creek Township in Erie County. I want to talk a little bit, and I think this probably plays in pretty well with what Julia just talked about, maybe making some changes to your ordinances to move towards some greener infrastructure. And so today what I want to talk about is, ordinances can be modified. And by that, I mean, they can be changed. You can update a section of an ordinance. You don't have to wait for that big update. I know everybody that has ordinances have this idea like someday we're going to rewrite this and make this better and make this perfect. But sometimes there's these low-hanging fruit that you can find, you can make minor changes to, and you can have a fairly big impact in a short amount of time. One thing to note is that land use ordinances, potentially have some special rules to them as far as notice, public meetings, public hearings, and things like that. I'm mainly going to talk about Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code, but if there's anybody here from any other states, just know that some of these rules are set by your legislature, and you may have different rules depending on where you are. But what I want to talk about as an example is parking lot landscaping standards. That was something that the Planning Commission suggested to the Board of Supervisors, that we look at increasing plantings in the right-of-way and parking lots. And that happened in May of 2015. Actually, it was spearheaded by Dave Skelly, who is a current and longtime member of our Planning Commission, but also was a former coastal land use specialist for PAC grant. And it was kind of tasked to my department and the Department of Community Relations and Sustainability to work with the Planning Commission to come up with these, these suggestions for changes. And pretty early on, we identified that the zoning code was probably the best place for these rather than a standalone ordinance, because it kind of has the most teeth. Everything in the zoning code is a shall. It's kind of hard for people to get away from. They have to comply with it. And we felt that was the best place to plug these in. I say we researched ordinances from Pennsylvania municipalities. Anybody that's ever written an ordinance knows I meant we stole a lot of stuff. There's a lot of good things out there. If you find a municipality that is doing something that you like and getting good results, there's no reason that you can't look at their code, see what they're doing, and borrow some of that. You don't have to reinvent the wheel to do it. We did have a lot of internal discussions with the Planning Commission and staff, but another thing we did was engage stakeholders, and stakeholders are important anytime you're making changes to an ordinance. They bring a point of view that you're not always thinking of. You think of it from the municipal side. They think of it obviously from how they're going to implement it. And also it's good to get their cooperation and their buy-in as you move forward. We did run our updated recommendations past the solicitor, which is always an important step. And you can see that the zoning ordinance was updated in March of 2016. So that's, I would say a pretty quick turnaround. That's, 10 months total, and that included all of our adoption time, which probably started in the beginning of January. So we had about 7-8 months of actual work and recommendations and meetings before the changes were out there for the public. And I think that was a pretty quick turnaround. So here's some examples of how we got to where we got. We used to just not really have any regulations as far as plantings and parking lots. And so we would have developers that would show things on their drawings, and I kind of blacked out the names to protect the innocent, because they were following our codes at the time when they built these. But in the drawings, they did show what looked like a planting island at the corner of 26th and Zook Road. But when it got constructed, they just kind of left the old parking lot there. They never put in the grass. The other parking lot you see on the right there, the drawing showed some nice end caps and some medians that we thought, oh, these are going to be pretty lovely. But then it was just easier for them to pave them and put those in with paint. So like I said, we didn't have a regulation that prohibited it. And so they gave us what they gave us. So how did Mill Creek fix that? Well, we made an edit to our zoning code in 2012. And we added this sentence: in parking lots of 1/2 acre or larger, at least 5% of the total parking area shall be devoted to landscaping. That was it. That was zoning code section 3.17.2. We thought we were done, right? Mission accomplished. Well, here's what we got. And I'm not afraid to shame this large retailer. This is Walmart. They placed, we did end up with 5% of impervious area within their parking lot. We were lucky to get some grass on the perimeters, but you see a lot of those end caps were just curbs with some mulch in them. That was it. That's what they considered their landscaping. So you kind of have to watch. One of the big things that we missed that we didn't do in 2012, we had no definition for what landscaping was. And so in the absence of that, it's a free for all, and we're going to get what we're going to get. Even when some developers did it right, we still got some unintended consequences. Here are two off of Interchange Road. This was the Field and Stream that was built in the Spring Hill Suites. Both of them went over and above the 5% impervious that we had asked them for, but they did it in different ways. If you look on the right, you see the Field and Stream. They've got the end caps. They do have bushes in there, but then they use stone as mulch for the end cap. So they're pretty much just stone with some bushes poking out of it. But then if you look in the lower left, same idea, but Spring Hill Suites, all those end caps and buffer areas, those have grass, those have trees, those have bushes. Right in the center of the drawing there, right below the white field and stream roof is kind of, to me, the biggest example. You can see it's the same island. On the right-hand side, it's just stone with some bushes, and then all of a sudden it turns into a beautiful green island. So, you have to be careful and you have to be specific to ask for and specify what you want to see. I think it's understandable. Obviously, you have developers who they have to look at the bottom line. They have to look at maintenance responsibility. And sure, stone is easier to maintain. You don't have to replace it as often as you have to do mulch. You obviously don't have to mow it. So unless you ask specifically for what you want to see, you're not going to get it. And so as part of our process, we researched some ordinances in Pennsylvania and compared them to our current ordinance. And we picked 3 in particular. We picked Pottstown Borough, the city of Pittsburgh, and Cranberry Township. And compared to our ordinances, we saw a lot of differences. Pottstown specifically was very strict. Their standard required 1 tree to be planted for every 2 new parking spaces, which sounds great in theory. But if you refer back to, Julia's presentation, what they really ended up with were those diamonds between every parking spot with a tree in it, which really didn't seem to be that big of a benefit. City of Pittsburgh, they were a little in the same sort of metric, but just a little more lax. They had 1 tree for every 5 new parking spaces. And then we looked at Cranberry Township, and Cranberry actually didn't specify trees per se. They specified pervious planting areas within every new parking lot, and then required trees to be placed in those planting areas. And we felt that that was probably a better way for us to go about it. Cranberry's a lot more similar to Mill Creek as far as both government structure and kind of the development pattern. They have new developments, they have redevelopments. And so we kind of leaned into Cranberry as our model, although we did borrow from the other 2 ordinances as well. So here are just a few recommendations that we then presented to the Planning Commission. First, under landscaping, adding to both the zoning ordinance and the subdivision and land development ordinance a definition for landscaping. And you'll see there that it includes trees and shrubs and ground cover, but excludes stone or other non-vegetative cover. We want green areas to be green and not just be mulch or stone. The other thing is we also specified that any area that wasn't a building or a parking lot or a driveway shall be landscaped. And again, not sure what they do with the rest of that area, but we didn't want to leave it up to chance. We wanted to make sure that those areas were going to be green if they weren't actively part of the development. Then as far as parking lot plantings themselves, we went with, like I mentioned, the planting or pervious area model. So we require 1 planting island with a minimum pervious area of 17 feet by 12 feet for every 15 parking spaces. And then we require an end cap with a pervious area of 15 feet by 12 feet at the end of each row, and 1 deciduous street tree at minimum in each planting island and end cap. So I know I'm saying 1 for every 15 spaces, that doesn't sound like a whole lot. But if you think about a row of parking that say has 16 spaces in it, you've got the planting island in the middle, plus you have 1 on each end cap. So that's a total of 3 with a minimum of 3 trees for 16 spaces. We're right in that 1 for every 5 parking space, kind of ratio. Another thing that we borrowed from Cranberry is the planting median. We require a 15-foot wide pervious area between every 3rd parking bay if you have multiple bays. And if you don't know what a parking bay is, just picture driving down an aisle to park and you have spaces on your left and spaces on your right. That's a parking bay. So if you have 3 of those, you can't have a 4th without putting a 15-foot wide pervious strip between the 2. And then in those strips, you have to have deciduous trees every 35 feet on center, and then a grouping of 10 shrubs or bushes for every tree, either clustered around or in rows in between. And so after we went through the Planning Commission review, the stakeholder discussions, we ran it past the solicitor, we were ready for the adoption process. Like I mentioned, in Pennsylvania, the municipalities planning code governs. So we went by section 609 of the MPC, which governs the zoning ordinance amendment. So you kick off the process, it gets sent to the Planning Commission at least 30 days before the public hearing. Planning Commission holds their hearing and makes a recommendation. You also have to set the updated ordinance to the county planning department, and they have 30 days to review and submit their comments back for you to incorporate. You do have to have a public hearing in front of the governing body, in our case, the Board of Supervisors, and it does have to be pursuant to public notice. So, that means publication in a newspaper, general circulation, a couple different times. You have to get that word out. And then after adoption, a copy of the amendment has to go back to county planning so that they can update their records. So as I mentioned, in March of 2016, Ordinance 2016-3 was adopted. And to kind of emphasize that it doesn't have to be anything really huge, here's kind of what we did in order to get what we wanted. We did add 5 new definitions to the zoning ordinance with this Ordinance 2016-3. We included landscaping material in there so that we knew we were getting what we wanted. Less than 4 of the pages of this Ordinance 2016-3 were actually needed to modify the parking lot planting standards to the new regs. It was just listing the sections, what the new language should be. Like I mentioned, it was less than 4 pages. We did not do a full rewrite of the zoning ordinance, but since we were going kind of through the process and you had to do the public hearings and you had to do the notice and everything, we thought, why not throw a few extra things in there? So one of the other things we did was we introduced a parking maximum at that time. And that parking maximum is 120% of the minimum number of spaces. So to make it easy, if you had a new parking lot and or a new development, I should say, and you were required to provide 100 parking spaces per our ordinance, you could build more, but only up to 120. You couldn't build any more than that. We wanted to reduce the parking. Going back to that Walmart example that I showed you earlier, they were close to double the amount of parking that we required them to have. It's just a waste of resources. It creates unnecessary heat islands. It sheds rainwater 365 days a year. And at the time, it was probably only ever close to full on Black Friday. And now since then, with the changes to retail and online shopping, probably never even see that parking lot more than half capacity. And so we did incorporate that as well. And I am kind of proud to say that even though these were incremental changes that we made in 2016, they were all copied over in their entirety when the township did have time to redo our zoning ordinance, which was adopted in April of 2022. So kind of some of the results that we saw. So far, we've had over 35 new land developments that have been submitted and complied with the new regulations, which results in hundreds of trees that otherwise would not have been planted, have been required and been installed. And the pervious area that is within all our parking lots is increased, and the total number of parking spaces and impervious area has decreased. I did forget to mention in the last slide, one of the things that we did with the new code that we didn't have time to get to in that 2016 amendment was we actually looked at every every parking requirement for every use we had and lowered them across the board more in line with current standards. We were working on standards back from the 70s and 80s, and we've updated all of those. So we do have reduced, smaller parking lots with much more pervious area in it. And so now's the time when I'm supposed to show you all of these wonderful pictures to show you what great success we've had. But the issue is all all of our aerial maps, we try and have taken in April before there's tree cover, leaf cover, so that we can see everything, which is great for seeing all of the properties, but not so great for showcasing all of the trees and our success at having trees planted. So you have to trust me on this one, but this is a new giant eagle that was constructed, one of the first under the new ordinance. And you can see scattered throughout the parking lot are the parking islands, the end caps. You can see that they actually qualified or required a parking median. So you see the 15-foot median up the middle of the parking lot there. That is a depressed area, so it does accept stormwater and runoff from the paved surfaces around it, used to reduce rate and improve water quality, which we were very happy about. And then each of those rows of parking, there's a tree, trust me, you can't see them, but they're there for every one of those rows. So for example, if you look at an end cap that has 2 rows of parking up against it, there are 2 trees there. Same thing with the parking islands. In the middle, 2 trees, 2 trees. So this was over 50 trees were planted just as part of this development alone, as well as the reduced, impervious surface within the parking area. Wanted to show, this is another one. This is a smaller, just an office that was built. It did not reach our threshold of a parking lot that's over half an acre. I think I forgot to mention that, but one of the other things we added was that any parking area of a half acre or more, at least 7% of the interior of the parking area needed to be pervious. So if you could get there with what we required for the end caps and the planting islands, that's great. But if not, those had to be increased in size, or additional ones had to be added so you could get to your 7%. I wanted to show this one because this is a small office that did not reach that half acre parking requirement, but we still see a benefit just with the end caps, the parking islands, and the trees that are planted adjacent to any new parking spaces. So it does show a benefit even in the smaller parking lots. And then one last example I wanted to show, this is a new Arby's that was built on West 12th Street. This was a redevelopment. Previously, the building with the black roof to the right there actually was larger. It was truncated and actually extended into where the new Arby's is. But you can see that in contrast to everything else around it that is pretty much wall to wall, either building or asphalt, the new Arby's does have separation from the street with a planted area. It has those end caps. It does have trees there. Again, I know you have to take my word for it. Even in the front of the restaurant where the handicap spaces are, you can see that they put the end caps in. They did come to us for a variance for the size, just because they didn't have the width to fit them in there. But we still ended up getting those where, previous to this, that just would have been entirely paved because it was more convenient. So to summarize, it's not that hard to make small changes that produce results right off the bat. You just have to be willing to spend a little time, and you don't have to prepare yourself for that huge dive. If you see some small changes that you can implement, go for it. It doesn't take that long. I will have to give a big shout out here to eCode, their website there, ecode360.com. They do have a multi-code search, and it's a great resource. It allows you to search and filter your search for any of the codes that they publish. You can do it by state. You can also include county, and you can include municipality type. So like for us, if I wanted to look for every code, or search a term in every Pennsylvania second-class township code that they have, I could do that. If you were in New York State and a village and you wanted to search a term in every village in New York State, you could do that. So that's a great resource, and it helps you see what other people are doing and how you can craft your ordinances. As I mentioned, make sure you're following your state guidelines, not only in the adoption process, but also in the regulation themselves. Land use ordinances can have some specific things that you can and can't do. One of the things that Pennsylvania allows is it allows for you to require financial security from developers for required improvements within their developments. That's for stormwater management features and sidewalks and things like that. The township, when we adopted this, we included parking lot plantings as a required improvement. And so we have the developer give us money up front for the purchase and installation of those items. We hold it as a guarantee. If they construct and install everything like they're required, we return that. If not, then we have the money to go about effecting these improvements, and that ensures that they get made, whether the developer does it or not. But again, that's state specific. So if you're from another locality, make sure that you're following all those. And then, my last advice, a bit of advice, is that your solicitor is a resource there for you. You want to make sure that you loop them in with what you're doing. You don't want to do a lot of work and give it to them and they say, sorry, you can't do this. You also don't want to adopt something and then potentially be in litigation about it in the future, wasting a lot of money. Kind of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So get your solicitor in on it as soon as you can. So with that, I'll close out my presentation. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your attention, and I'm here for any questions if you have them.
Right. Thank you very much, Matt. Do we have any questions for our presenters today? Well, not seeing any, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank both our presenters and the attendees today. I think the content was wonderful. And if, as I said earlier, if anyone has any questions after we conclude the webinar here shortly, please feel free to reach out to myself or the presenters directly. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day. Thanks again.